Welcome to Real Insights by Purple Karrot, and today's guest is one of the stalwarts in accounting world, having spent 38 years as an accountant, starting from the bottom and working his way up to become Chief Financial Officer or CFO of major multinational companies, and now a CFO of one of Australia's most iconic charities. He's a leader who leads by example and dedicates much of his limited spare time to sit on a number of sporting and charity boards. His name is Ross Bidencope, and he's heavily involved and connected in the business world. But importantly, he's a great father, husband, and friend. And I think the other important thing is his lookalike of Billy Crystal. So we could also talk about some of his movies that he's done over the past number of years. But welcome, Ross, to our Real Insights podcast.
Thanks, Shane.
So, mate, let's kick off. 38 years in accountancy. I didn't realise you were 38 years old. You know, that's a massive journey.
I try to keep in shape. It's got to keep up with you young fellas. It's kind of a...
So you started from the bottom. What does the bottom look like in accounting? And
in accounting, I started as a trainee, and it was an interesting story, really. I had applied when I was nearing or halfway through university, and I was studying commerce, and I'd applied to all these accounting firms, and just heaps of firms, and I got some replies. Most of them were kind of, wait and see till you've graduated, etc., etc. And then just before, I just finished exams at uni, and I was in a pair of shorts, t-shirt and thongs, and I got this ring. I rang home just to say, finish the exam. My mum said, you've got this call from what is now KPMG. They want to talk to you. So I rang the fellow up, and he said, we'd like you to come in for an interview just straight away. I said, well, I'm not really dressed in the right attire. He said, don't worry about it, just come in. So I turned up at their then Australia Square offices, because I went straight from uni, and sat in reception with all these other people, similar age, but they were all in suits and ties. And I was in a T-shirt, khaki shorts and thongs. And felt so embarrassed. But anyway, I sat there, and I still remember it to this day. The partner called me in to have a chat, and he'd read through. When I got in there, I was quite a handy footballer at the time. He just wanted to talk about football. And he said, and have you got any results? He just wanted to make sure I was competent, but he said, kept back on to the football. And anyway, went on. He said, okay, well, how would you like to work the Christmas holidays with us as a trainee? I thought, sounds like a good gig. So I walked out through reception with the partner shaking my hand, saying, we'll see you here in 2 weeks.
So everyone in the suits was sitting there.
They're just going, what the? That was just amazing. It shows, as I think, and one of the things I've always found important, that remember, firms are looking for people, one, that can play as part of the team, and generally a lot of that is sporting people. And in that case, they had a sporting team, and they had an annual event that they played against another accounting firm, and they wanted to make sure they had a pretty good football team. But it's amazing, those type of things, that your sporting connections and what you do outside your academic world can make a real difference. It provides you with those social networks. It provides you when you're going for your first jobs through friends, etc. References. It is just important to have those, and it shows, I think, fundamentally that you're a person outside just an academic brain. You've got other interests, and that gives them an idea of the type of person that you are and what they may want to join the organisation.
So culture is critical.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, right. So Roscoe, what made you get into accounting?
It was either a choice between becoming a PE teacher or doing accounting. I was, very good at economics at school, but I love sport, and at the end of the day, my father got me to talk to a few of his friends who are in the accounting world, had a chat to them to give me a bit of an idea, and also I talked to some others, and they're saying, look, you can go and become a PE teacher, etc. There's not much money in it at the end of the day. So I kind of weighing it up, enjoyment, money, and at that stage I just wanted some money. So I went the accounting route.
Are you glad you did it?
I am glad that I did it, and I think I've come full circle. I mean, now I actually work for Surf Lifesaving New South Wales, and in many ways you get involved in, obviously there's a finance side, but you're getting involved in the life-saving, the sport, the membership areas. It's going to the areas of things that I really enjoy. It's actually mixing a passion together with my professional career. So if I look at my young self and look at where I am now, I've kind of managed to put the two together and have the best of both worlds.
Well, I was going to touch on this later, but what would you say to your young self, knowing what you know now? What would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself, one, to cultivate the networks. It's always important to, and I was never very good at it. I'm not a schmoozer by any stretch of the imagination. You've got to go out there and meet people. Remember, your office, your bosses at work, etc., they're only people at the end of the day. Get on with them, talk to them, ask some questions. And they generally will like being asked questions that are about careers and things. They'll give their own pieces of advice and what they've struck through their careers. And I think try and be as self-aware as possible. I think if you're self-aware and know what you want before you start, and I can think of a specific example. I was going into uni with a girlfriend and her father, and we were just chatting, and he was a successful businessman. He said, "What do you want out of life, Ross?" And I said, "Look, I just want to be comfortably well off and have a good quality of life." Whereas his daughter said, "I want to be rich." And I said, "No, I don't really. I want to have time to do other things." And if I'm looking back, I think I've done that fairly well. I wouldn't say I'm comfortably well off. I've enjoyed the time. I've got a good work-life balance, and I think I've fairly well achieved what that young Ross was wanting to do. So I think I was reasonably self-aware of what I wanted. In other cases, I know where my strengths lie and what I'm not good at. Like I mentioned about the networking, I'm not. Sometimes I can be a bit introverted rather than extroverted, and I don't like small talk generally. And so that schmoozing to try and cultivate a network's not me. I can see how it benefits people in a career sense, but it's not me.
It's not natural to you.
It's not natural to me. And I like to think that I've got a very high level of integrity, and that's something I've always tried to carry through my working career. And sometimes I remember an old boss who was an ex-premier and he actually said to me, he said, "Ross, to get on in the merchant banking world, you're too honest." So there's pros and cons. You've got to realise where your strengths and play to your strengths, and generally it will work out. So kind of know when sometimes there'll be opportunities and you'll say, say for instance, I mentioned the merchant banking. I got given an opportunity there, worked in that area for about 3 years, but at the end of the day, being a salesman, schmoozer, and sometimes things went against what my beliefs were, wasn't for me, and I had to realise that and make a change.
So you're in accounting, but what does that mean? Because there's so many different types. So what kind of an accountant are you?
I would say that's difficult. I mean, the areas that today I spend most of my time on are both the management and financial accounting for the organisation. Financial being the production of financial reports, a commentary on variances, etc., for the organisation. The management, how that ties into strategies that the organisation wants to put in place. But during the time that I've been there, I've also had to do forensic accounting, which is digging into areas, trying to put pieces together, trying to explain where things have happened, etc., etc. And that was extremely interesting. I think if I was looking at accounting and what areas do I really enjoy, it's sometimes either the putting together proposals where you're working with the rest of the organisation as a team. It's almost like a football team. You're going out and you've got a strategic plan that you want to put in place to gain certain business. Or the other is modelling or forensic accounting, putting pieces together to try and explain the puzzle. And that is effectively you're doing a giant jigsaw puzzle, and that really does give you a buzz. But above all, it's the accounting of you're providing financial advice to people in an organisation. You're the financial advisor to that organisation. And it's answering their questions, making them understand how what they do in the business ties into what happens financially in that business.
You mentioned before honesty is key, and I think from my point of view, getting an accountant who's honest is extremely important, because if I need to know where the future of my business is going, I need my accountant sitting back there knowing where it's going and how to get there in an honest and integral way, because that's going to be critical to the future sustainability of the business. How have you worked in with honesty and in a company, and maybe a CEO who wants to push scale onto the business that from your point of view it's unsustainable? Like, how do you approach something like that?
Generally, I've tried to, if that any situation where it's probably pushing against my moral judgment, I'll generally go and put the case and say, look, this would, in my mind, not pass the pub test. If this got out, this could cause severe reputational damage, and tried to push it that way. I've never had to I think on very few occasions, and one to my own detriment, had to put my foot down and say this is not right. And effectively, I had to go one way, and the organisation went another way. The board said, "Look, thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll change it, but there's so much you can't work with these people anymore. You've just basically."
I'd imagine you hold your head high though, moving forward.
Oh yeah, I can look back and say I did the right thing, but in some instances it can cause you can be the collateral damage.
Ross, I just asked before what are the different types of accounting, but I often see behind an accountant the letters CA and CPA. Just for a lot of our listeners and viewers, what is that, and what's the difference between both of them? And thirdly, where can it take you? Those three things.
Okay, there's two main accounting bodies, and there's subsets within those. There's what is now the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia and New Zealand, and they generally go by the designation CAs, Chartered Accountants. And then there's CPAs, which is the Certified Practicing Accountants. And there's been a number of instances over the years where they've tried to merge the two bodies. It'd probably be beneficial if they did. To become a chartered accountant, you've got to do what is termed a professional year of study, which is extremely rigorous. Once you've finished university, you've got to do 18 months of just work experience. Then you commence a professional year, which is a year of study and assignments, followed by exams at the end of the year. And that is, it's quite highly recognised as being extremely difficult. The CPA, or the Accounting Association, has a year of study, but it's not as rigorous, and that's why over the years there's been this snobbery between the two. Yeah. Most of the the large firms, if you would hear about your EYs, your PwCs, your KPMGs, they're made up of CAs. Everyone has to work in those firms have passed their professional year. And if you want to go out into public practice, most of them are chartered accountants, whereas CPAs tend to be more in commerce. They haven't done quite as rigorous exams or etc. over that year, and that was part of the reason the merger. The people who've done them didn't want to let the other ones get a free ride. Eventually, I think they'll get together and it'll be one accounting body, but that's essentially the difference.
Ross, I have often asked a lot of people the questions experience versus education because it depends on what you're doing. In this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, education is hugely important, like a bachelor's degree and more, in the accounting world versus, say, straight out business where experience is very critical. Where do you rate or where do you see experience versus education?
I think it's a timing issue. When you first are going to be an accountant, it really comes down to an academic qualifications that one will show. So from school to university, in either a Bachelor of Commerce, Economics or Business, to get your qualifications. And that also then shows to your employer that you're competent, you have the necessary knowledge for them to start training you. But as you move on in your career, the qualifications are less important. It's more the experience that you have in what accounting software, what you've been exposed to, whether it's taxation, investment analysis, etc., whatever you've been, you start to specialise as you go along based on the experience that you've got. And that's what organisations, as you climb the, I suppose, the accounting staircase from junior accountant up to senior accountant to supervisor, manager, and so on up they're looking for your level of knowledge and experience, what you're good at, so that they will, I assume, say, we want a part of you to join our company or firm and provide that expertise. So early it's qualifications, later on it's experience and what you've done during your time.
I think that's a really good tip though, but what you're saying is education is key, particularly if you want to get in the accounting side.
You won't get into an accounting with no academic qualifications. It's just none of either the association or the Institute of Chartered, you won't get qualified. I mean, years and years ago, people used to start in accounting firms as clerks, and gradually they would learn on the job. But nowadays, you can learn on the job, but you've still got to get the qualifications to get into the firms. And then both organisations also require you to do a certain amount of study throughout every year, kind of hard and soft study, some of it going to seminars, etc., on particular topics, and just reading. They all require that it's a kind of lifelong learning process.
So I'd imagine there are other ways though. If I didn't do that well out of school, I can still go through TAFE, and it might just take a little bit longer.
It takes
but I can still get through.
Yeah, it takes a bit. You can go to TAFE, do a bookkeeping course there, and then you can generally probably get into uni from there. Once with your TAFE qualifications as a what do they term it? Older age student.
Mature. You'd fit that one, Ross.
No, I'm not. But I had a number of people. I remember a guy from the Navy who'd gone. He figured he was going to leave the Navy. He went to TAFE, did a bookkeeping degree, then went to university, did his professional year, etc., and I mean, it was amazing. He used to go out to clients. It was quite funny, actually. He'd wear this nice suit with a white shirt, and then you'd see all the tattoos down his arms on either side.
Not what was once
so
the traditional count.
While we were taking our jackets off, he generally had to keep his jacket on just for the professional appearances.
So, I mean, when you were growing up, what was particularly in your younger days as an accountant and what you know now, what does the traditional day look like for an accountant?
Oh, it varies as you're going along through that path. I mean, very early on, it's you're doing a lot of reconciliations for your superiors, et cetera, finding information, doing it's odd jobs. You're effectively an administration clerk to start off with, and you're learning as you go along. I mean, my day now is mostly spent between writing briefing papers, board papers, and answering questions of senior management and doing the research to provide that information.
So you're off the tools, so to speak.
Always on the tools. I'd still say that, awful lot of time is spent in front of a computer. And there'd be less time of probably using, a calculator or using the numbers keypad on a computer, but it's a lot more, I suppose, writing of reports rather than just creating the numbers in those reports. I mean, less doing journals from an accounting sense.
So for those younger ones out there, you mentioned the tools before. What are some of the ones that, if they were looking to get into accounting, what are some of the tools that they should be aware of? I mean, from my point of view, not an accountant, all I know of is MYOB or Xero. Well, what are some of the other things out there that they must be aware of?
Oh, there's so many, and there's always new ones coming up. There's another one of the small accounting packages, QuickBooks, is around, but everything's moving to the cloud nowadays. Or just generally in the smaller to mid-business size accounting software, rather than once upon a time you had to go out like you do with your Microsoft Office, buy that computer package, load it on your computer. Now you rent these packages on a monthly basis, and you use them. As long as you're paying your rent, you're able to use it. And that goes all the way up. And they also provide all the storage. You don't need the massive powerful PCs or mainframe computers to store all the information. They're storing it over the web, and when you're calling it, you're calling it back through the web. So that's one of the major changes that I've seen. But when I first started, it was you got given a pad of paper and a calculator.
The abacus.
Well, some people did use that, or an old accounting machine. I can remember the first Apple computers, which were coming in, that you used to take to a client, and they were like a large, I suppose, travel bag that you'd take with you. It's changed so much since those days to now that.
So is it technology that you found has changed the most from the 38 years ago that you started to now?
It's technology, definitely technology.
The principles reasonably the same?
The underlying principles are the same, very much the same. And it's actually, in one way, learning those, and when you go to university, learning your debits and credits, et cetera, is still the same. And if you know how to do it on paper, it helps when it comes to a computer. If you don't understand that, sometimes that can lead to strife, that things are happening in the computer system that you don't fully understand. There's some very large computer programs as well, which still reside on large multinational mainframes, such as SAP being one example, or Oracle. They're the two major ones, but there's others out there.
So in terms of future prospects, though, because we've gone from the past to the future, everything's getting cloud-based. Do you fear the accounting industry? Because if it's all getting cloud-based and it's all being monitored and it's very data-driven, is the accountancy industry as we know it today going to change to a point where all the data is inputted into the cloud and it's just going to spit out the other end, and accounting in itself could change? The reason I say this, I was in a conversation last night, and future roles, and accounting was actually one of the ones raised, that it may not necessarily not here, but certainly transform to what it is today.
Artificial intelligence will no doubt transform accounting. A lot of what was the data entry, putting in the numbers, et cetera, adding them up, et cetera, can be done by artificial intelligence. What the artificial intelligence, it can even look through the numbers and give you patterns in those numbers, but it can't provide the advice. So one of an accountant will become a lot more one of giving advice and giving you reasons behind things, which the artificial intelligence, it may improve. I mean, I've heard that artificial intelligence will be able to learn the law, and a lot of lawyers will be out of office because put all the facts in, it knows the law because it's learnt it and will basically give you an outcome, etc., etc. It's going to be... I don't know. I'm not in that area, but I've heard that there's a lot of areas, but you've got to think of where you're providing a service with that human touch. Is the advice, etc., which I think it will head more in that direction.
That is really interesting. I'm glad we touched on that because I think I didn't think of that when I thought last night and hearing that, well, what's the future look like for the accounting? And then to hear that, advice, you still can't take out that human element, very critical. So, Ross, for future prospective accountants, and whether it's called that, we'll stick with that.
Yep.
But what do you look for? Like if you got someone coming out of school or, graduating from uni, looking for a job, what do you look for a successful accountant?
Well, one, first thing you're going to look when you're going through the resume is have they got the qualifications? You're then looking for, if it's the junior level, what are their interests? And then you'll have a gut feel. Because generally, like anything, you're wanting people that you think will fit in with your organisation, fit in with the team. So then you go to the interview stage, and it's generally the people, when you're interviewing, the people that are friendly, they're kind of a...
You're big on culture. I get that feeling.
I'm very big on culture and personality and emotional intelligence. I don't want a robot working for me, and I also want someone...
I'll do that in the future.
I want someone also, who has that integrity. You asking questions in that interview, and from those answers, you're trying to elicit, can they fit in with the organisation? They may fit in another organisation, but not fit in at this organisation. You're trying to get the best fit because that will give you someone that you can collaborate with, the others in your team can collaborate with, and if they've got some knowledge of the organisation or what the organisation does, that's a bonus as well.
You mentioned before you work now at a not-for-profit, but you've also worked at multinationals. What is the major difference between working in we'll call it a smaller business, even though it's big, versus a multinational? What are the major differences that people need to be aware of when they're looking to go into that? Because you mentioned before the big firms, PwC, KPMG, a lot of it's all about having that brand on their or that name on their resume. But what are some of the nuances that they probably need to be aware of? It's not all glitz and glamour by working for a big firm. You could potentially learn a lot more in a smaller firm.
The large firms are effectively they take masses of graduates from the university. It's like a huge pyramid. They suck in heaps at the bottom, and it's like I always thought it was a bit like university away from university. It was it was great socially. Then the further you go up that pyramid, the work pressure increases and what you're required to do increases. And everybody, you'll soon determine, going through that, and I was worked in the audit area for a number of years and looking at different organisations, giving you a flavour of all these different industries, and then you can choose what you think will suit you. And you can also look at the partners and what they're going through, long hours, they look stressed, etc., etc. And again, when I went to the merchant banking industry, some very clever people working extremely long hours, devising strategies, etc., etc. But it does obviously impinge on their work-life balance. It impinges on their families. You can see high divorce rates and things like that. I look at some of my colleagues that I used to work at, and they...
was it all worth it?
Yeah, was it all worth it? They're very, very rich. A lot of grey hairs, a few broken marriages. There was a guy I went to uni who became a partner in one of the major firms, and that was his life, but he's now dead. He died of a heart attack fairly last year. And
you are trying to recruit people to accounting, aren't you, Ross?
Yeah, but I'm trying to point out you need to keep that balance in and look after yourself. I mean, that's the difference I'd learned when I was working for a US multinational. They had a great culture. They did look after you, but at the end of the day, you're still a commodity to them. You provide a product to them, and they will keep putting stretch targets in front of your face, and you've got to jump to reach those, and it becomes more and more stressful. And at a point in time, I decided, well, I'm a bit sick of this. I want to go to something that means a bit more to me. I've generally had fairly altruistic goals in life, and that something that would be giving back to the community more rather than just have as a profit motive the driver. That's the main difference.
Mate, I think that's really fair. But I think it also comes back down to just listening to what you're saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. It comes back to the individual. What does the individual want? How driven are they? Do they just see dollar signs, or do they want to make something?
Exactly.
And there's no right or wrong to that.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I said about very early on in this conversation. I said it's about being self-aware, knowing what you want or you think you want in life, and knowing what your strengths are, and then you'll make mistakes and you'll learn from mistakes, but it allows you to at least set a plan in place and a guide to where you're going. And remember, at the end of the day, all employers are only people, and people generally want to work with people that are friendly and get on with other people.
Oh, I think that's really, really good advice. Ross, just some final tips for the young people out there looking to get into accounting. What separates the individuals and from success and just being a run of the mill?
I think if you're going into the accounting, and this was one of my probably weaknesses, is attention to detail. All the way through your professional career, make sure you check certain things twice. I'm generally probably a bit bigger vision person. I like thinking ahead and kind of the vision. Sometimes that extra bit of checking I find so boring, but you've got to do it. I've learned there's so many times I've ended up
added it as extra zero.
That you just overlook something and it can cause issues.
So, attention to detail.
Attention to detail, build those networks, be self-aware, and always ask questions. And remember, and ask questions of your superiors at work. I mean, it was a bit different when I started. There was a general used to hold these superiors with a degree of awe and be a bit reticent. And the other thing, from an early CEO in my second job, I went to him and I was doing these statistical diagrams for his presentations, and he asked me, etc., how you're finding it, and I said, it's okay, but sometimes it gets boring. He said, listen, son, and he was a CEO of a kind of ASX-listed organisation, which is now part of Wesfarmers. He said, no matter where you go, there's always going to be times when you're bored. It's just how you use the time.
Oh, Ross, I think that's a great tip. And I've even learned a hell of a lot listening to you today. I think there's a lot of knowledge in that brain of yours, Ross, and that's why we're trying to unpack some of that and inspire some of the next generation coming through, particularly the ones wanting to take on that accountancy journey. So, mate, really appreciate you coming in.
No, thank you.
And thanks to everyone for joining us, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel with notifications on all the podcasts. Check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and everywhere you find podcasts. And follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook at purple_carrot with a K. And importantly, subscribe to purplekarrot.com. Thanks again for checking out our Real Insights podcast and video, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.